Jacksonville at Houston. This is the battle of the young, hyped, future superstar quarterbacks. Which way do you see this one going?
It would be really nice to see Trevor Lawrence come out and have another really good fantasy game. You know, last week was his first game over 18 fantasy points all year, and obviously he smashed that. He had 32. And it'd be great to see Calvin Ridley come out and ball out after going like 8 for 122 and 2 touchdowns. But the Texans, they've been a kind of up and down team in terms of their defense. There's been games where they've really clamped down on opposing wide receivers. We saw it against Marquise Brown a couple of weeks ago. We've seen Derek Stingley is now back and healthy and looks to be playing well. So try to predict how the Jaguars passing game goes feels really difficult. Evan Ingram has had 4 receptions per game over the last couple, but he's had no more than 29 yards in the last 2. But that is an area where you can get at the Texans. They've allowed the second most fantasy points to tight ends. So if you're looking for a DFS dart throw this week, Evan Ingram feels kind of okay. His price is getting down and down because he isn't producing. Christian Kirk, he just kind of has that safe floor of like 45 to 50 receiving yards. And the boom weeks really come when he gets in the end zone. And that can be hard to predict. I think you just got to take him on a week-by-week case of what your lineup needs, whether you can afford to sit him or, whether you feel the matchup is really good. We saw Zay Jones back last week for the first time since like week 4. And he didn't have a huge impact in terms of what he did on the field. He had 4 receptions for 20 yards. So, yeah, it's tricky. I think Travis Etienne, it'd be great to see him get going. He hasn't finished inside the top 20 running backs for the last 2 weeks. The Texans allow the 18th most fantasy points to running backs. So, that's kind of middle tier, nothing too great, nothing too bad. And I would expect, though, in DFS tournaments, the majority of ownership leans towards the Texans because they're just straight out balling. I mean, you look at Tank Dell, you talked about in this week's Dynasty Rise and Fallers video. Wherever you're at with Tank Dell, you probably need to bump him higher because he's been a top 12 wide receiver in back-to-back weeks. Nico Collins came back, had 7 receptions for 65 yards. And it came kind of at the expense of Dalton Schultz, who had a season-low 7% target share, but was saved by the touchdown. And again, that's an area that the Jags struggle to defend. They've allowed the 9th most tight end fantasy points, so maybe we see a Dalton Schultz bounce back. I think Devin Singletary, I'd have full confidence playing him again. He's been a top 8 back in back-to-back weeks, 100-plus rushing yards in both of them. The Jags, they allow the 17th most running back fantasy points. Again, just middle of the table sort of stuff. So it feels like this is a game which could go many different ways, and I think that it's going to be a game which I'll probably heavily attack in DFS. And just, hopefully we see some consistency from the Jags, because otherwise it feels like the Texans are going to be breathing down the neck in that AFC South division.
Yeah, I mean, the Tank Dell hype seems absolutely ridiculous. I thought I was really high in terms of Dynasty circles. I've put him as my wide receiver 20. I put out my wide receiver ranks on Twitter, and the number one comment I got back was, you need to bump Tank Dell up. You need to bump Tank Dell up. And I was thinking, I'm so much higher than consensus, and people are telling me I'm still too low. It's wild. The Travis Etienne trend, I don't think we've probably touched on it enough. I don't think people are talking about it enough at the moment. He's had an under 60% opportunity share the last 2 weeks. You said that he's not produced the last 2 weeks. It's suddenly gone from Tanks Bigsby isn't getting it done. Let's give Travis Etienne all the work. And he was getting north of 80, 90% opportunity share. He was getting all the receiving work. He was getting everything. And the last 2 weeks, they've suddenly gone, boom. He's now only a split backfield. He's not getting the work. Dearness Johnson's getting serious run. Tank Bigsby's still getting the short yardage work. I think this is a real concern, because if this is how they're going to have this offense moving forward, I think Travis Etienne's no longer an RB1, which is mad, because this is a guy that was probably a top 2-3 running back as little as 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, and I agree. And I think one of the things that, like, when you looked at Travis Etienne's numbers last year, after the Jags cut James Robinson and really turned the ball over to him, he wasn't hyper effective on a lot of touches. He wasn't good inside the red zone. Like, there were plenty of flaws with his game, which is why they went out and got Tank Bigsby. And if this is just a case of Travis Etienne is one of those running backs who can't hold up to a real volume-based sort of week in, week out role, then yeah, I would be potentially worried and potentially looking to trade him in redraft, or if you're a contender and looking for a bit more of a sure thing down the stretch.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely something to monitor this week. We'll call 2 weeks a blip. I think 3 weeks is definitely a trend.